What up, Wizards? It's Dev. And Igby, he's down here. He's kind of a rare Pokemon around these parts. We're from Mtg. We like it a magic. And we got like 25 Innistrad Midnight Hunt spoilers for you today. And that's fewer than we've had the last couple of days. But the difference is, today there's some really hyped stuff. Now, we're going to start, as usual, with the draft stuff, kind of work our way up to the big stuff. But we're not going to be talking about limited playables for too long because there's some really cool cards today. Let's get to it. Alright, we'll start with Eaten Alive, Blade Brand, and Organ Hoarder. Now, Eaten Alive is just a black mana for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice a creature or pay 3 and a black. And you can exile target creature or planeswalker. So, it's basically Spark Harvest, but you exile. So it's like a strictly better Spark Harvest. If I'm reading it right, it's really not terrible at all. It's cool that you get to sacrifice the creature, but you exile their thing, so you'll get any value off of sacrificing stuff that you might be looking for. Just a really kind of a sweet card. And we've seen stuff like this see occasional standard play, but I'll have to be convinced of that. Now, next is Blade Brand. This is 2 mana, 1 and a black for an instant. Target creature gains Death Touch till end of turn, and you draw a card. So this is strictly for chump blocking in limited most of the time. Right. Or you attack with a small creature, they block with a bigger guy. You pull a fast one on them, and you get to cantrip, too. Draw cards. So, I don't know. It's not terrible, but I definitely wouldn't play too many copies of this in my limited deck, to be honest. Organ Hoarder is next, though. This is 4 mana, 3 and a blue for a 3/2 zombie. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand, and the rest into your graveyard. Now, I've talked about how I don't like 3 mana 3/2s, and this is a 4 mana 3/2, but the enter the battlefield trigger is very much good enough to make this worth playing in a lot of decks. What you're going to want to do with this a lot of the time is just trade on blocks and take the ETB value. It goes ahead and replaces itself when it enters the battlefield with the best card from the top 3 of your library, and you get a body on the table. Like it a lot in limited. Hound Tamer is a cooler looking uncommon for the Werewolves deck in limited. This is 3 mana as well, 2 and a green, for a 3/3 human werewolf with trample. You can pay 3 and a green to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and this card has Daybound. And when it flips over, it's Untamed Pup. This is a 4/4 werewolf with trample. Other wolves and werewolves you control have trample. You can pay 3 and a green to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and this has Nightbound. So this looks tempting to put into your actual standard werewolves deck because the stats are almost there. A 3 mana 3/3 trample that transforms into a 4/4 trample that gives a global sort of anthem-y effect to all your other wolves. This looks almost playable with the anthem effects and everything, or with the mana sync, I should say. That allows you to spend your mana when you might otherwise not be able to do so. So there are some really cool things about this card, especially from sort of a budget deck building perspective, but I think it just barely misses the mark that we're trying to hit in standard werewolves, but in limited, this is a very, very strong uncommon. But there is another uncommon for the Werewolves deck in limited that I think might actually see some standard play, especially out of the sideboard. This is Outland Liberator. It's 1 and a green for a 2/2 human werewolf with Daybound, and you can pay 1 and sack it to destroy target artifact or enchantment. But if you hold off long enough for it to become night, it becomes Frenzied Trap Breaker. That's a 3/3 with the same ability. You can pay 1 and sack it to destroy an artifact or enchantment. But whenever it attacks, you destroy target artifact or enchantment. Defending player controls. So it's just nothing but goodness, right? Just 2 mana for a 2/2, so you get bear stats on a wolf, right? I guess it's a human when you first play it, a human werewolf. But yeah, you get bear stats on this, and then the ability to just blow stuff up. And that is typically very good, right? Like a Reclamation Sage or Utabi Orangutan or something like that. Which this effectively costs the same to do, right? But you can play it on turn 2 if you want to. I don't know. I think that's really, really cool. And when it does flip over, you effectively paid 2 mana for a 3/3, so it's like a werewolf pack leader in that way. But whenever it attacks, you blow something up. You don't have to worry about sacrificing it. But if there is a time where you want to blow up more than one thing in a turn, you can do that too. Just a really sweet card that I'm not sure is worth like putting in the main deck, but in best of 1, it might be worth a 1 or 2 of. It really might be, but in best of 3 Magic, I think this is mostly relegated to the sideboard, where I think it plays a really important role. But that's not all the transform stuff we saw today. There was also Bareb Survivor. The card's gotten a little bit of talk so far today. This is 3 mana, 2 and a white for a 2/1 human peasant. Whenever another creature you control dies, you transform Bareb Survivor into Dauntless Avenger, a 3/2 human soldier with, whenever Dauntless Avenger attacks, return target creature card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, tapped and attacking. So this I want to like more than I do, right? In terms of standard play, this is a white 3-drop, and that is a really, really crowded slot that I don't think this ends up in, I don't think that it beats out the sort of competition for that slot. But if you're in some sort of aristocrat stack or something, I could see this being okay. The problem is when you do get it to flip over, which isn't actually that hard in aristocrats. Just sacrifice a guy. Or, a guy dies in combat. It happens all the time. Deadly dispute something, right? So it can flip over like relatively easily. Combat is a thing that happens in Magic. So I don't see that being too much of a problem. In which case you've paid 3 mana for a 3/2, which is like pretty bad most of the time. And this has to actually attack to get you any value. There has to be a good thing to target in the graveyard too, which shouldn't be so hard. Whether it's an Eye Twitch or a Shambling Ghast, or maybe it's like a Luminarch Aspirin or something like that. There's plenty of good, decent targets for this. Problem, I guess, is that, let's say you do bring back your Luminarch Aspirin, well, you've missed the attack trigger on it, so nothing gets a counter, and you're just attacking with a 1/1. So it's probably going to die, and this is probably going to die too, because it only has 2 toughness. Maybe your opponent has to trade something with it, but ultimately, I just feel like you're really doing a lot of work for, not enough return, even though it looks like a pretty tempting card, right? The back half of this looks like it could be really good, but I'm honestly not seeing it. When you get down to how the play patterns are actually going to play out, I don't think it's actually that good. But there's just a few more of these today, like Morbid Opportunist, Thraben Exorcism, and I guess I'll throw in Field of Ruin. We got the reprint that we were all kind of hoping we would get, especially if the Facebook combo is still in the format. Faceless Haven, Book of Exalted Deeds. I win, I guess, that combo. It's nice to have Field of Ruin in the format for sure, so we can deal with that. But there's probably other stuff Field can do. It's a good card to have around. But anyway, Thraben Exorcism is 2 mana, 1 and a white for an instant. Exile target spirit, creature with disturb, or enchantments. I think this is maybe worth main decking in Limited. We'll have to know more about the environment and how many of these card types are actually seeing play, but I imagine a lot of creatures with Disturb are going to see a lot of play. So I think it's actually not bad at all, especially for 2 mana at instant speed. But, you're probably going to catch a copy of this in your sealed pool or your draft pool somewhere, because it's common. And I don't think it's going to be taken super highly, depending on how the format shakes out. At least not at first. I don't think this card gets taken super highly. So just remember that you have this card on your board in Limited and kind of look for reasons to use it. But Morbid Opportunist actually looks pretty cool. This is my usual MO. This is 3 mana, 2 and a black for a 1/3 human rogue. Whenever 1 or more other creatures die, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. So, bit of a downer at the end there. It doesn't protect against sweepers the way that you want it to. And it also has the word other on it, which is super lame. So, this is a very tame, Midnight Reaper or other creatures like it. I feel like we see a creature like this in just about every standard environment. And this one is more poo-poo than some of the others that we've seen, but I guess at least it doesn't make you lose life the way Reaper did. But Reaper was still a much better, and for what it's worth, just far more metal and awesome and cool card. I miss Midnight Reaper, man. But still, this will still draw you some cards in your Aristocrat stack, although at a glacial pace, but you'll take the cards, I imagine. Now, last page of kind of lower impact stuff, but a few of these cards I think actually have a real chance. Let's look at Stuffed Bear, Moon Silver Key, and Jack-O-Lantern. Why am I so stoked that we have a Jack-O-Lantern card? Well, I'm just super happy, if nothing else, that there is a card that represents a Jack-O-Lantern. I think that's super cool. We haven't had that in 26 years. Dude, I like the flavor. Anyway, Jack-O-Lantern actually looks really cool. I'm excited about this card in terms of function, too. This is just 1 mana for an artifact. You can pay 1 and tap it and sack it to exile it to 1 target card from a graveyard and draw a card. You can also pay 1 and exile it from your graveyard to add a mana of any colors. So this is a cool little egg, and I know it's a pumpkin, but it's an egg in that it's a cheap artifact that you can crack to do something, right? And both of these things are cool. You get kind of a Soul Guide Lantern, or Relic of Progenitus. There's been a million artifacts like this in terms of the first ability, where you can mess around in graveyards and get a little bit of a cantrip effect for relatively cheap mana costs here. And then once it's in your graveyard, you get some mana fixing out of it, which can also be sweet. If you're mono black, just for the sake of argument, and you're playing Valky and you need a way to play the Tybalt half of it, this gives you the mana that you need to do that. So that's cool if you don't have any treasure laying around or whatever. So I don't know. There's a lot of really cool things about this card. I don't know that it's going to be any more than just a role player, but it does kind of have that glow to it, right? I don't think it's going to be the face of any decks anytime soon, but it might carve out a place for itself in the format. I think that's enough puns. for now. I just really like this card, in case you can't tell. So let's move on to Stuffed Bear. Another card I really like in terms of flavor. It's kind of hilarious, but Stuffed Bear is 2 mana for an artifact. And you can pay 2 mana to have it become a 4/4 green bear artifact creature till end of turn. I wish that its ability also gave it haste, so you could just play it on turn 4 and go ahead and swing with it. That would be a little cooler, but honestly, I don't think this sees like standard play or anything, but 2 mana for a thing that's not a creature until you need it to be, so it's protected from sorcery speed removal and like wrath effects and stuff like that. It is actually like not terrible. It's really I kind of like it. For 2 mana initial investment and then 2 mana whenever you want it, you get a 4/4. Like I don't know. Like you play this on turn 2 and then turn 3 you activate and swing for 4. I don't know. Again, probably not standard playable, but there's something about it. I like it. I kind of like the cut of its jib. I don't think that it's actually terrible, but I like I've said, it's no real competitive play whatsoever. But I think it's kind of better than it looks. But we'll move on to Moonsilver Key, which will probably see some commander play, right? This is 2 mana for an artifact. You can pay 1 and tap it and sack it to search your library for an artifact card with a mana ability or a basic land card. Reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. So this actually, I think, has some like real impact, again, especially in Commander, but even in Standard. Like you can go find your Strixhaven Stadium with this. You can go find your Celestis or whatever it's called from this set. If you have a deck that sort of revolves around an artifact that just happens to be a mana artifact, like there are a few of these actually, aren't there, now that I think about it. Like there are a ton of these, like 4 and 6 mana artifacts that have a mana ability, but also do other ridiculous stuff. There's a bunch of stuff. I feel like they just released like a 4 or 6 mana artifact that taps for like 5 colorless, but also makes it to where like colorless mana is any color when you want it to be. I will find this card and I will put it on screen. Was it Chromatic Orrery or was that something else? Anyway, there's a ton of mana producing artifacts that you might base your entire deck around that this can go and find for you in Commander, so I imagine this actually sees a good amount of play. But let's get into the more rare cards and whatnot from today, and some really good uncommons too. But we'll start with Vadric Astral Archmage here. This is 3 mana, 1 a blue and a red for a 1/2 legendary human wizard. If it's neither day nor night, it becomes day as Vadric enters the battlefield. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost X less to cast, where X is Vadric's power. Whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, put a +1/+1 counter on Vadric. That's not bad. I mean, it's a 3 mana initial investment for a really fragile thing, so let's get that out of the way. But, aside from the obvious downsides to the card, this can start making mana pretty quickly, especially if you have, like, other exterior ways of increasing its power aside from it just being day or night, right? Like, you can throw just like an instant at this, that like you can infuriate this, for instance, and suddenly instants and sorceries you cast cost 4 or less to cast. It seems okay, right? So if you like untap with this on the battlefield on turn 4, it doesn't matter if it's night or day or whatever. Like there's plenty of ways to just point 1 pump spell at this and then just go off and do ridiculous stuff. So I kind of do like this card. I think it's probably a really, really cool commander for what it's worth, but I'm not sure that it's gonna see much standard play, but it's gonna see play in a bunch of janky combo decks, and that's what I like to do. A lot of the other cards from today are just like so cool that it's kind of hard to know where to go next. But I guess we'll go to Sigarda's Splendor, which is another card probably going to see a fair amount of commander play. This is 4 mana, 2 and 2 white for an enchantment. As it ETBs, note your life total. At the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card if your life total is greater than or equal to the last noted life total for Splendor. Then, note your life total. Whenever you cast a white spell, you gain 1 life. Now, this card doesn't look super great, and it's probably not, but it is mono white card draw, and that's probably good enough to see play in Commander, but in Standard, maybe. It's possible. I really do think that it is. I think that a key to this card is 3 words, or equal to. Your life total doesn't necessarily have to be higher than the last time you noted your life total. So long as it's the same as the last time you noted your life total, you will draw a card. So, and this goes obviously really well in a life gain deck. That's probably where it's going to end up most of the time. But, imagine this with stuff like Cosmos Elixir and whatnot. Is this just a worse Cosmos Elixir? Now that I think I haven't really thought about this yet. For the same cost, is this just a worse elixir? Maybe, but now I don't know that I like it as much as I did. But it's still mono white card draw. That pays you off for doing a thing that you often want to do in white anyway. And if you can just stall the game out and not lose life, this into a Doomscar and reset the board state or something like that. And then for the next few turns, right? You should draw some cards so long as you can again stall the board state out. So if this just kind of works like a Howling Mind that only works for you, I guess a Phyrexian Arena is a better example. But if this is kind of a mono white Phyrexian Arena that costs one more and doesn't hurt you instead, actually it's kind of the opposite of Arena. It counts on you getting life. But if this just draws you a card every turn, I think it's probably good. I think it's probably good, but a 4-mana initial investment's a lot. It does nothing the turn it enters the battlefield. So there's a lot of pretty obviously bad stuff about this. But in terms of commander playables, it's really hype, and it's mono white card draw. And we've seen a few white cards that draw cards in this set, and I'm kind of liking it. We've seen white cards that approach drawing cards from a bunch of different angles, and I like that too. So they're working over there at Wizards. They're trying their little heads off. They are. Give them a break. It's mono white card draw. It's what we asked for. But speaking of mono white card advantage, I might as well talk about Solomonian Savior here. This is 5 mana, 3 and 2 white for a 3/3 angel with flying. When it ETBs, if you cast it, return up to 2 target creature cards with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So I really want to like this card, a lot. This is usually my kind of card. I both hate and understand why it has if you cast it. It's got the Cyclone Summoner thing on it. You can't reanimate this. You can't flicker this. We know your tricks. We're not going to let you do them. Which I kind of hate. Although I do think this would be a ton of value if you could reanimate it. It'd be a really good reanimation target. Especially in older formats where you get back some really broken 2-drops. In this format, I guess you can get back Luminarch Aspirant. Which is probably worth getting back a lot of the time. And you can get back other stuff, you can get back, there's a cool interaction here, where, let's say a Fearless Adversary, I think it's called, the mono-white adversary. It's a 2-drop that has, a multi-kicker type ability. The thing is, and I haven't brought this up with the adversary cycle yet, but it's like multi-kicker, but kicker occurs when you cast the card. The adversary cycle happens when it enters the battlefield, which is good for a lot of reasons, right? You can't pay a billion mana to kick the spell and then you get blown out by a counter spell or something like that. It's just functionally better than multi-kicker a lot of the time. When it comes to this, you could always reanimate Fearless Adversary, and if you happen to have any mana left over, you could pump mana into Adversary's ability, right? And then Anthem your team any number of times that you have mana for. That does require a lot of mana, yes, but it's a play line that can happen, so I want to point it out. But still, I like the card, again, especially an Aristocrats, an Orzhov Aristocrat shell where you're going to be sacrificing your 1 and 2 drops. I think a card like this is relatively powerful, but it is really bad stats for the mana cost, I'll say that much, and the mana cost is high. 5 mana is kind of a lot for what you're getting here, but you're getting 3 power worth of stats that fly, but you're probably also getting another 3 to 4 power, in stats off of that. So you might be getting 7 power in stats for your 5 mana investment, and that might be more than good enough. I think that there's a lot of push-pull to it. I really want to like this card. I think there's probably some cool setups with it in Standard that I want to explore, but I'm not entirely convinced that it's at the level it needs to be Reveillark or something. But let's look at Lair Leer, Disciple of the Drowned here. This is 5 mana, 3 and 2 blue for a 3/4 legendary human wizard. Spells cannot be countered. Each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard has flashback. The flashback cost is equal to that card's mana cost, wouldn't you know it? So it's Drownu. It's Drownu, everybody. But in some ways it's worse than Drownu. The thing about this is that spells can't be countered. Spells, period, can't be countered. Which also means that your opponent's spells can't be countered. So what you want to do in most decks, I think, is play this and then have a way to protect it. Which usually means holding a counter spell up. But you can't do that. You specifically can't do that with this card. You also can't flashback counter spells, which would be ludicrous. That would be pretty good as a way to protect it. But the card just takes all that off the table, so I think it's bad. I think a 5-mana 3/4 that doesn't really do much to turn at ETBs. Now, if you have like 6, 7, 8 mana, it can do something to turn at ETBs, and I think that's good enough. Like, normally, again, that's the problem. Like, in a control deck, you'd want to play this when you have 7 mana. You pay 5 for it, the negate in your graveyard is now up. But it doesn't work that way, so it's just not as good. Your opponent's removal spell will resolve against this, is all I'm saying. But if you do get the chance to untap with it on the battlefield, like, probably get to do some outrageous stuff. Maybe it's a cool commander, right? But like for 5 mana in standard, I guess we have Imrith, and that doesn't even see much play, and that's like a ridiculously good card. So I'm just not sure that for 5 mana this works, but there might be a deck that wants it. Although I think you have to build around it, right? Again, the deck can't play counterspells. It has to be a very heavy blue deck, probably. I guess there's ways to get around that, but still, a heavy blue deck that doesn't get to play counterspells sounds like a losing battle, and I'm not sure if it's worth it to play this, but maybe like Blue-Red Burn wants it as like a finishing piece to give you gas or something. Like, there are reasons to play the card. There are reasons to be excited about the card, but I don't know. My expectations are massively tempered with a card that wants you very badly to be able to play counterspells, but then you can't. But, you know, I guess I yell about counterspells enough here and on the stream that a card that says spells can't be countered should be something that I'm really into. So I like it. There's a million reasons I like it, but I'm trying to be objective. As usual, I'm sorry to be a downer. But up next, let's look at a card they probably designed forever ago, but just recently named because Among Us is a thing. Let's check out Suspicious Stowaway. Blue is in fact sus. This is 1 and a blue for a 1/1 human rogue werewolf that can't be blocked. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, draw a card and then discard a card. It has Daybound. Now, when it flips over, it becomes Seafaring Werewolf, which is for some reason very funny to me, and I don't know why. It's a 2/1 werewolf that can't be blocked. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you draw the card. You don't have to discard anything afterwards. You just draw the card. And then it has Nightbound. Now, when I first read this the first time, like as I was reading it, I was like, oh my god, you're going to be Invisible Stalker, aren't you? But then it wasn't, which is good. I'm like super nervous that they'll reprint Invisible Stalker. I have nightmares about that card. But anyway, I used to love that card too. But I don't think it's a great idea to have it in Standard. This looks pretty good, guys. This does. It's got some actually like really relevant creature types. I think Rogue is kind of cool to slap onto this 2-drop. For the new version of Standard Rogues. It might be kind of cool. Can't be blocked is really sweet, especially if there's ways to increase its power and whatnot. Looting is really cool too. I mean, like, just the front half of the card is kind of fine. Honestly, I can't be blocked and I loot every time, like, sure. But when you do flip it over, if you ever do, then suddenly you get a 2-power guy that can't be blocked and just draws a card. Like, straight up card advantage. Like, how? That's so freaking good. Like, I don't even have, like, a whole bunch of tech with this card. Like, oh, you know, if you combo it with this and there's this interaction, like, that's my job, and I don't really have that with this. It's just a really solid card by itself. I mean, I guess I said it can go in rogues. So there's that. But still, you don't really need tech with the card. It's just kind of an obviously solid magic card. I like this thing, like, so much. You know what else I like, by the way, is Sluger the Overslime. Just, again, this is a card I mostly like in terms of flavor. But this is 3 mana, 1 a green and a blue for a 3/3 legendary ooze with trample. Whenever a land card is put into your graveyard from anywhere, put a +1/+1 counter on Sluger the Overslime. Remove 3 +1/+1 counters from Sluger to return it to its owner's hand. Whenever Sluger leaves the battlefield, return up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand. So this is a neat commander, if nothing else. It works pretty well with like Life from the Loam. There's actually a few cards this set that work well with Life from the Loam. Like we saw Willowgeist the other day, and I didn't even talk about how good that works with Life from the Loam. Oh, and earlier I didn't talk about how awesome Jack-o'-lantern is with Willowgeist. Hey, I'm just saying. Play Geist turn 1, play Jack-o'-lantern turn 2, pump the Willowgeist, draw a card, next turn, fix your mana, pump the Willowgeist, 3/3 on turn 3. I don't know. It could work. That's all I'm saying. But let's get back to Sluger. First of all, love the name. I do. Note how many oozes we have in Standard, y'all. Think about it. Like Gelatinous Ooze, Oran Reef Ooze, this, and there's like 2 or 3 other ones. We've actually seen a couple of other oozes in this set too. So like Ooze Tribal. Let's go, Ooze Tribal. I don't know. This is just a really cool card for a lot of reasons. You know, it works with Fabled Passage and Historic and Modern, I guess, if you probably don't want to play it there. You know, it works with Fabled Passage and Historic. Works with Evolving Wilds pretty well in Standard too, for that matter. Works with all kinds of self-mill and whatnot. Kind of works pretty well with the new Rin and 7 and her plus abilities. So it's a sweet card. It's a really cool card that comes into play as a 3-mana 3/3 trample, which aren't the worst stats in the world. So even if it gets like 1 counter on it, you paid 3 mana for a 4/4 trample. Not bad. A second counter, 3 mana for a 5/5 trample, yes. Like it gets very good very, very quickly. And it can protect itself if you get counters off of it. Note too that you don't just put counters on it by using its abilities or, you know, by it triggering or whatever. There's plenty of ways, like again, let's say you're Inu's tribal and you've got an Orin Refuse. That puts counters on this. There's plenty of ways to put counters on this. That can then help protect itself, like much faster, I guess is what I'm getting at. Just a sweet card. And then when it does die, then you get some value. You kind of get to draw some cards, you know, I don't know, guys. I think that this is actually pretty pushed, and I'm not sure that it's good enough to see like a ton of standard play, and obviously there's some building around that you have to do, but I don't think that the building around is actually like that bad in terms of opportunity costs. Like, I don't think you have to put 20 cards into your deck that you otherwise wouldn't want to play to make this card pop off. I think this card incidentally pops off with a lot of stuff we're already doing. So, I don't know. Just a cool dude that probably gets really big faster than you think. But let's look at Rim Careless, the Stalwart Slayer, baby. This is 3 mana, 1, a red, and a white for a 2/3 human knight that's legendary. It also has flying and haste. If a spell would deal damage to you or another permanent you control, prevent that damage. If a spell would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent opponent controls, it deals that much damage +1 instead. I like that its name sounds like an adjective for the card. The card absolutely does look Rim Careless to me, man. Like, just delicious. I hate that the word another is on this card. Like, cards from the last couple of days keep getting ruined by like one word away from greatness. But I still think this is really sweet. It does die to Frostbite. It does die to like Dragon's Fire. So keep that in mind. That sucks. that sucks butt. But still sweet card, right? It comes down, immediately swings with evasion, which I do like about it, and it makes your Frostbites better. It makes your Dragon's Fires better. It makes your new shocks better, you know? It turns your new shocks into bolts that scry. That seems good, you know? We just need like one more sweet burn spell. I like that this turns a bunch of burn spells already in Standard into proper burn spells. You know, it turns the new shock into a bolt. It turns the new lightning helix into an actual lightning helix. So that's kind of cool. It's just, you need this card out to turn on, to unlock or reprint all of the cool burn spells that we want access to, right? But I don't know. I really like this card a lot. I like that it goes ahead and gets attacking the turn it enters the battlefield. I do hate that it's got white in its casting cost, because that means that it's competing with a bunch of good white 3-drops, but I think in Boros this almost certainly makes the cut, especially if you have a bunch of removal. And like, these decks already play Frostbite, right? And now you'll throw in some more burn than you were already playing. And hopefully we see some more cool burn. But it looks like there's sort of a Boros burn / aggro deck thing coming up. Like, imagine playing this on turn 3, and then on turn 4 you go like Showdown of the Scalds, right? So on your next turn you can start putting counters on this. You've been attacking with it the entire time, and maybe you got a bunch of creatures or burn spells off your Showdown that you can cast for reasonably cheap and keep growing stuff. Like, I could see the deck working out, but I could also see that deck not being good enough. So really some push-pull on this one. I'm not super sure. I'm still on the fence about it. But I do like this card, like, a whole lot. It's like the most swole Sky Knight Legionnaire that I've ever seen. But Sky Knight Legionnaire really didn't see much standard play, like, at all. So it's no Mantis Rider, right? So I'm just not super sure about it in the end, especially because it dies to the removal spells that you're trying to prevent. But at least it lightning rods, right? Like, your opponent has to kill this rather than the thing they might actually want to kill. So there's plenty of cool stuff about it, and it does make a standard burn deck a little bit more viable. Wish it wasn't legendary. That would be great, but it does make standard burn slightly more viable. And I guess if you want to build Boros burn and Commander, have at it. This is your commander, so maybe it's not. There might be better Boros burn commanders, but this is a pretty good one, right? Still, I don't know why you're playing Boros burn commander. It seems like a losing battle. Either way, sweet card. But there are some legendaries from today, not just that one, that I think are destined to see some real standard play. So we'll look at Katilda. It's one of my favorite children's movies, Katilda. She's the Dawnheart Head Witch, and she costs a green and a white for a 1/1 legendary human warlock with protection from werewolves. Neat. Human creatures you control have tap, add 1 mana of any of this creature's colors. You can also pay 4, a green, and a white, and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Alright, so it sucks that it only works on humans, but, like, that's still pretty good, man. Like, that's still pretty good. A decent humans payoff, too. I think that even with no other humans out, though, like, it's kind of fine. Like, it's 2 mana, and it produces 1 of 2 colors, and then also has a sweet activated ability for the late game, so... I don't know. It's kind of good, especially in like Selesnya tokens. If you do have the mana late game to activate this ability, and obviously this card makes it easy to activate that ability. I think it's pretty sweet, right? And like late in the game, especially in a tokens deck, you might be getting into board stalls, stalemates, where neither player can really attack profitably. And this card helps you break those stalemates, right? Because you won't attack, your opponent won't attack into you, and then on their end step, you just activate this, your creatures get a little bit bigger, and it won't be more than 1 or 2 turns of that before you get alpha, especially with all the other creatures you might have out, your Luminarch aspirants and stuff. So, you know, you're putting counters on like elite spellbinders and they're getting bigger and flying over. It's just, I don't know, it looks like a pretty sweet little card to me. I like it a lot as just like a 2 mana producer. Like just the floor on it is good enough, but if it starts to do if it begins to even start to ascend to the ceiling, the card gets very, very good. And it just, in and of itself, it pays you off for ramping. There's just a lot I like about the card. And I think it almost is virtually guaranteed to see some amount of play. Now we're getting down to the final few cards of the day here, and I really feel like I need to go ahead and point out Unnatural Moonrise, ladies and gentlemen. This is the newest card of the day as I record this video, and it's kind of the one we've been waiting on, whether or not this is going to be in the set or not. And it turns out it is. It's red and green for a sorcery. It becomes night. There it is. Until end of turn, target creature gets +1/+0, trample, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card, and you can flash it back for 2, a red, and a green. There's a lot of ands on this card. Like, and you can do this, and you can do that. Like, just a 2 mana sorcery that makes it night. Playable, right? Like a Moon Mist or something like that. That's probably playable. It's my favorite flavor of Fago, too, by the way, is Moon Mist. Seriously, Moon Mist is the best name for a product ever. Moon Mist? That sounds so cool. What a good card that was. And now we have it in Standard. And it does a bunch of other stuff. I mean, just a 2 mana, like a 2 mana sorcery that gave all these boosts to a creature would probably not be playable by itself, right? But that is really good gravy. Like, trample on a big guy and draw a card when it deals combat damage. Like, yes. Like, this is basically, you know, a way to make it become night at sorcery speed that also sort of replaces itself. You know, like kind of cantrips. If you can get a guy 3 for combat damage. Easy to get the dude 3 for combat damage because you're giving it trample. So, and then later you flash it back, like once your opponent plays 2 spells and makes it day or whatever. You can just flash this back like a couple turns later and be like, no, all my wolves are wolves. Stop it. So, I don't know. The card like looks this side of busted, but it's going to sit dead in your hand for a couple of turns a lot of the time until you know, pull the trigger on it because you have a critical mass of werewolves or anything. So, like, I'm not saying the card is, like, super amazing, and I think that it's going to take up a slot in your hand, much less a slot in terms of opportunity cost in your deck, but I think in the Werewolves deck it's probably going to be worth playing some number of a card like this because you really want it to be night. And this just not only makes it night, but it also makes one of your werewolves a boss for a turn, and that's also, it gives you card advantage. Like, whew, just, we were waiting on a card that just makes it become night, but we got way more than that, and you can play it twice. Like, dude, sign me up. But let's move on to one of my favorite cards of the day, and we've only got a couple of cards left to talk about. This is Slaughter Specialist, Sergeant Slaughter, baby. 2 mana, 1 and a black for a 3/3 Vampire Warrior. And when it ETBs, each opponent creates a 1/1 white human creature token. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Sergeant Slaughter. I don't know why people are calling the card bad. I do not understand. I mean, I guess there's a scenario where you play this on 2, and then your opponent frostbites it, and they have a 1/1. And that's actually a reasonably common scenario. So I do get why people are pooing on the card. It's the same reason I poop on cards. Oh, it dies to removal. And in this case, when it dies to removal, it gets your opponent a board advantage. And a 1/1 is more than you think, honestly. I mean, a 1/1 is something. 1/1 is something. So, like, the card definitely has, like, fail cases. The floor is extremely low on this card, don't get me wrong. But there's a bunch of stuff I do like about it. It blocks and trades with a Werewolf Pack Leader on turn 2, which is very important for a mono black aggro deck to be able to actually do. Now we have a couple of ways of doing that. White can come into play tapped, which sucks because it doesn't immediately block the Pack Leader. But white is still a 2-mana, 3-power thing. So now we have 2/2-drops in our, mono black aggro deck that can go toe-to-toe with a vampire, with a Werewolf Pack Leader. I think that's just an important thing to note right off the bat. Of course, you might get blown out by Blizzard Brawl. Yeah, you might, but still an important thing to note. Second of all, your opponent's creatures are going to die. Not even just to your removal, But I think that something that people are forgetting about this is how much your opponent might not want to attack with this card on the battlefield. Because you'll block a small guy, and that makes this guy bigger. If any of your other opponent's creatures die, or either any of your opponent's other creatures die, rather, then suddenly this becomes like a 5/5, and then a 6/6. I mean, this thing gets really big really fast. And, like, opponent's creatures die in combat or to removal spells or whatever. It happens. Imagine playing this against a sacrifice deck. It's kind of natural tech against aristocrats in a way. I like that, too. There's a lot of sweet things about the card. And it's a warrior, by the way. So it works really well in, like, the vampire or black-red party deck, which is something I've brought up a few times. But, man, we didn't have any, like, 2-drop, wizards in mono black. And we got one of those this set. We didn't have any warriors in mono black at all, except for some of the arena-only cards. We have, like, Mardu Outrider, and I think there's a 2-drop warrior. But I don't like to play those cards. I do not like to put them in my deck. I like to just pretend they don't exist. So, just out of principle, I guess. You don't have to do that, but that's just kind of how I feel. Those cards aren't actually in Standard, so I don't want to play them in my Standard Magic decks. In best of one, at least. So, now we have an actual, like, honest-to-God, Standard playable, legal and Standard printed Magic card that you can have in paper. That is a 2-drop warrior on turn 2, which, again, is very important for the party decks that may not have had so many warriors, especially in mono black. And if you're black-red, you got some warriors. But again, just that's an important thing to point out. But mostly, I think that for lack of a better word, threat of activation on this is really, really good. Your opponent's not going to want to attack into it with a bunch of creatures. Basically anything 2-power and under. They're not going to want to attack into this with. So I think there's a lot of really cool stuff. And even though I will admit that the fail case is bad, like really bad, pretty much every other case is very good. It's quite good. Let's look at the final card of the day so far, at least. That is Teferi, who slows the sunset. Oh no, it's a Teferi. Did you feel your butthole clench up a little bit? Like, oh god, what does this Teferi do? It's actually not that bad, though. This is 4 mana, 2, a white, and a blue for a legendary Teferi Planeswalker with 4 starting loyalty. You can +1 Teferi to choose up to 1 target artifact, up to 1 target creature, and up to 1 land. Untap the chosen permanents you control, then tap the chosen permanents you don't control, and you gain 2 life. You can -2 Tefs to look at the top 3 cards of your library. Put one of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. And if you're -7 Mr. T, you get an emblem with untap all permanents you control during each opponent's untap step. It's pretty live. And you draw a card during each opponent's draw step. So if you get to the ultimate on this thing, it's really good. It's quite good. Like this plus Vorinclex, and whoops, I get to untap every turn. Whoops, I get to draw a card during your turn. The ultimate on this is very sick, and I feel like I can actually discuss the ultimate on this because it ain't too hard to get to. Vorinclex or not, it's just a couple of 3 turns away. So I don't know. I like the ultimate on this a lot, and I think it's one of the cooler parts of the card. But it doesn't really protect itself in any meaningful way, right? I wish that maybe it froze down things that you tapped as long as those things belong to your opponent. That'd be nice, but that might also be too much. I think that the ability to play this on turn 4, untap a mana artifact and untap one of your lands is probably a pretty big game, because in that way you get to protect it, right? You get to untap and hold up Negate, or hold up, I don't know, like Disdainful Stroke or something. Like you get to untap a couple of mana sources and then protect it in that way. So it's kind of similar to like the 5 mana Teferi, I guess, in that way. But only if you have a mana artifact or something. But there's plenty of other artifacts that you might want to untap. You could also have a mana creature out, and in that way you could basically untap 3 mana sources, meaning that you only played this for 1, and now you have like Saw It coming up. Like that could also be very good. But you can also give a creature like Pseudo Vigilance, which is very sweet. Like attack with your Goldspan Dragon or something, get the treasure token, and then untap it. Like, yeah, it's probably fine. Like, I like a lot about the +1 on the Teferi, but it doesn't actually protect the Teferi. But it does have a lot of use. You know, again, you can untap one of your creatures to give it Pseudo Vigilance, or you can play this first main phase, tap a guy down, and then get in with your Goldspan Dragon because you tap their flyer. Like, a lot of cool stuff about this card. And in that case, you'll have a 5 loyalty Planeswalker, which is not too shabby. Like, they can't just untap and kill that a lot of the time. So, especially considering you got to untap a creature. So that is the way that it protects itself, I guess, the most, is by untapping one of your creatures to block for it. But obviously there's a lot of deck building concessions. It doesn't just go in a normal blue-white control deck. You got to play some creatures to untap. You got to play some lands to untap. Or, not lands. You got to play some artifacts to untap to like really get the true value out of this. So there is that. But the second ability, the minus ability on this, is just solid. It's just Anticipate, and I'll take that 9 times out of 10. You know, it's usually the first ability I use with Professor Onyx. So I imagine getting this for 4 mana is probably better than 6, right? So I don't know. I think it's a sweet little Planeswalker, but it's obviously not as busted as the Teferis that we've seen over the years, and I don't know. I salute that. But that appears to be everything from today. This is probably a long video. There's just so much to say about like every card. There was some really like juiced cards today. So hope you enjoyed it. And since some of the cards today are like so nutso, I probably missed some interactions and stuff. I may have even gotten something wrong. So let me know all of that down there in the comments section, where I screwed up. Anything I missed, any combos, interactions you're excited about, what cards from today you're most excited about, what takes you agree with, don't agree with, all that stuff. It's a fun time down there in the comments section. Why don't you join the party? Aside from that, just like and subscribe. I need the subs right around now. It's a good time to sub too, because, you know, decks coming soon. Not only decks, but like all kinds of Innistrad Midnight Hunt content. And, you know, rotations happening. It's going to be a much better, brighter, sunnier world until it becomes nighttime. But it's going to be a better world, so make sure you sub for all the content and stuff. Aside from that, do all this mess over here. Watch me on Twitch. Probably not going to play Magic next time on Twitch. Probably going to talk Magic, which is also fun. We're going to do some spoiler talk and stuff and round things off on Twitch. So make sure you follow me over there. It's free to do so. Don't be afraid of the platform. It's a fun platform. Aside from that, the old Patreon, you give me $1 a month and you can vote on what decks and just content, period, that we do during Innistrad Midnight Hunt Standard. So $1 is a pretty good deal. I'm worth $1. I'm worth $1 a month. It's $1 a month. You're paying me like 0.0 something cents an hour at $1 a month. Help me out. Aside from that, follow me on Twitter if you really want to, but you don't have to. And I guess that's it for this one. Again, just go down there and let me know how you felt about it. And I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.